Welcome in former NFL GM Michael Lombardi right here. Michael, good morning. How's everything?
Everything's great. Thank you. Good morning to you both.
Absolutely. We are still in it's before the draft and we're in free agency and all of that, but we are still in this sort of afterglow of what in the world got into Kevin Colbert spending all this money. It is so atypical Pittsburgh Steelers. Does it hit the same thing and resonate the same way nationally? Like, what's gotten into the Steelers here?
Well, I think when you don't make the playoffs, I mean, we saw it last year with New England, right? New England did exactly the same thing. I mean, this is a more expensive market than New England's market last year. Some of those deals that New England signed, everybody was talking about how ridiculously expensive they were. Based on this market, they actually look cheap. So, I mean, you got to try to improve your team every way you can. It's a draft isn't going to be the sole answer for you. And, you find a way to do that through trying to make shrewd deals and good deals that are more than just one-year deals.
What is the calculus, Mike, when you're trying to figure out how to, I guess, cover all your bases? And the Steelers routinely do this, whether they spend a lot of money or a little bit of money. This is the first time they've ever spent a good chunk of change in free agency. First time they had this much cap space, probably ever. But how do you balance the calculus of, hey, I want to make sure I cover all our soft spots before we get to the draft, so I can, truly draft the best player available, especially in the first round, while also saying, well, yeah, but if we spread out what we've got, we might not get a true impact player anywhere.
Well, I think you always have to ask yourself one fundamental question: is this player worth the money we're paying him? I mean, there's two valuations that are taking place. There's the player, and then there's the contract. And when you can do both, when both you feel married together, James Daniels, for example, get a starting guard, for a relatively good deal that he's going to come in there. He can play center. He can play either guard. You feel really good. Miles Jack, you come take him. I think he was one of the best players before the knee injury. I think he'll certainly continue to improve. I would expect him to have a great season for them. You get a really good value of a player, of a middle linebacker who's a three-down player. Then all of a sudden you're really starting to make some progress. And I think you look at both and you try to do it in terms of your draft needs, your team needs, but you just can't solely stick to those. You have to try to improve the team and then raise the level of competition at all the positions you possibly can and marry it to the draft. And I think Pittsburgh has always done a great job with that. From my time being in Cleveland, I've always admired how the Steelers were always a year ahead in their planning. They were always very good at being able to find ways to solve their problems internally with their depth and with their team needs.
Fan Morning Show presented by Matt Mertz Plumbing, now part of the Armstrong Comfort Solutions family. Mike Lombardi joining us here, GM Shuffle podcast. You could check it out. Michael, where does Mitchell Trubisky rate for you? Does he have an opportunity, do you think?
I've never been, unfortunately, a Mitchell Trubisky fan. I think, to me, I learned a long time ago, past performance predicts future achievement. Bill Walsh taught me, never take the one-year player and look forward. Always take the one-year player and look back. And when you watched him play at North Carolina's senior season, which delighted the Bears and made them trade up one spot and ignore Patrick Mahomes, ignore Deshaun Watson, and pick a player who basically had 13 career starts, I thought it proved that Walsh theory perfectly. I think Mitchell's a player that has to practice what he sees in the game, and it's got to come off exactly that way. He is not a rhythmic passer. I mean, he's never going to be confused for Danny Marino in terms of anticipation, throwing the ball. He's got really good athleticism. That's why Ohio State wanted him to play free safety. They didn't offer him a scholarship at quarterback, even though he was Mr. Ohio in the state, and that's why he went to North Carolina. I think this is a challenge for the Steelers coaching staff. I think this is going to be a system where you're going to have to groove it. They're going to rely on Najee Harris. They have to improve their offensive line. But Trubisky's not a rhythm thrower, an anticipatory thrower, much like Rudolph. And I think this is going to be a challenge. And if it doesn't go the way you practice it, if Matt Canada can't script it perfectly for him, I think there'll be some concerns.
Mike Lombardi, the GM Shuffle podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Former Browns VP and GM and NFL personnel guru with us here on the Fan Morning Show. Let's turn the page then to the draft. If Mitch Trubisky's not a long-term answer, and I tend to agree with you in that regard, can they find a long-term answer at quarterback picking 20th in the first round?
I don't see it. I mean, everybody's going bonkers over these quarterbacks in the draft, and I don't see. To me, when it isn't you label a player a first rounder. There has to be a description next to the player which indicates the round. For example, if you pick Kenny Pickett and you say you're going to pick him in the first pick, say you pick him the 15th pick in the draft, you're just not saying he's a first rounder. What you're really saying is this player will come into our team, and by the second season, he will become a starter, and he will become an upper echelon starter at that position. I don't think you can say that about any quarterback in this draft. I don't think you can say that about – you can't attach that verbiage to any quarterback in this draft. Malik Willis had a great workout. I've been to so many quarterback workouts in my career. I mean, Jake Locklear had a great one out at the University of Washington. The ball never touched the ground. He's not playing. I mean, the workouts are the most ridiculous thing. I wrote about it on vsin.com about how they're just not really relative to playing the position. So, to me, this draft, as much as the mock draft experts want to make it out to be in a quarterback draft, I think Matt Corral is probably the most rhythmic player. He sees the game. He's not very big, which is a concern. Look, Baker Mayfield's size is hindering him in Cleveland. As great as Kyler Murray is as an athlete, his size is really hindering him in Arizona. You take a short quarterback, you play small at the position.
Well, then, how about this plan? Then they just go ahead and live and die with either with Mitch Trubisky or with Dwayne Haskins or with Mason Rudolph, whoever they have. Go ahead, get through this year, and then draft the kid from Kentucky or the kid from Boston College or one of the other quarterbacks next year, because those are real quarterbacks.
I think you're right. I think you can't force it. I think the worst thing you want to do is force something. I think because here's what you don't want to do. I think Washington did this year. You don't want to sign a player at a position and still need it. Pittsburgh did it too, for me. Even though they signed Trubisky, they still need a quarterback. Even though they traded for Carson Wentz, they still need a quarterback. Even if you draft Kenny Pickett, you still need a quarterback. That's my point, and I think you're so right. You have to have a vision. And what you're trying to do while you're on these cheaper quarterback deals is improve the team around you. You no longer have to carry Ben Roethlisberger's huge salary. So you can increase your team. You can rebuild your offensive line, rebuild your defensive line. And then when you get that young rookie quarterback, your cap will be really good for 3 years, and all of a sudden your team is going to be able to compete. Look at Kansas City. They could keep all these players when Mahomes was on the rookie contract. Now that he's not, they're going to have over $40 million in cap money spent on the left side of their offensive line when they sign Orlando Brown to go with Joe Thuney. That's why they can't keep Tyreek Hill.
Mike Lombardi, the GM Shuffle podcast, with us here on the Fan Morning Show. Let's talk about Tyreek Hill for a moment, because I think as probably the most electric, not probably, I think he is the most electric guy in the game. He can take a ball 6 yards deep in his own backfield at his own 2-yard line and somehow turn it in to a 90-plus yard touchdown. Is it worth, though, what the Dolphins gave up? Because it seems like wide receivers, even the best of them, maybe Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill are the exception to the rule, but they're being looked at as disposable as running backs by some.
I'm with you on Tyreek Hill. I think he's a top 3 receiver in the league. He scares the living Jesus out of everybody. I mean, every defense you call when you're playing against Tyreek Hill, you're scared to death. And what he's really great at doing is he's great with the ball in his hands. Remember, this is a kid at Oklahoma State who played running back, right? He was not a receiver at Oklahoma State. He was in the deep set in their one-back formation, and he was dynamic. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's really, really good. He's more than just a deep ball. He's a weapon. And when you get a weapon, it's hard for me to let him go. I think, to me, the way everybody played the Chiefs last year was a tribute to Tyreek Hill. The safeties weren't that deep because they were worried about Kelsey. The safeties weren't that deep because they were worried about Mahomes. The safeties were that deep because they were worried about Tyreek Hill running past them. And I think that's going to affect the Chiefs' offense a little bit, but they had to make choices, right? They have a huge quarterback contract. They're rebuilding their offensive line. They're trying to rebuild their defense. There's only so many dollars to go around. But I don't think the Chiefs are going to find a player of equal value no matter how many draft picks you get for Tyreek Hill. The issue really became down to how much could they afford financially.
What happens at this Deshaun Watson press conference, whether it's today or tomorrow? How is the room, and do you think that people will ask those tough questions that need to be asked?
Oh, I think they've been rehearsing this since they signed him. I think he'll be ready to go. He'll be bright, polished, and shiny. I mean, It's one of the reasons why the FBI never allowed anybody to interview Marina Oswald after Lee Harvey Oswald killed the president. They wanted to brush her up on all the questions that were going to get asked and make sure she answered them correctly. It's the same thing here. Watson's going to do exactly answer the question. I think the bigger issue than the trade and the questions are the contract. They did something in Cleveland that has never been done before.
Does it change contracts in the future forever?
It's going to change contracts forever. I mean, they guaranteed. It's an NBA contract. It's a Major League Baseball contract. This is something that I wrote about. This is something that has never happened before, a buttoned-up contract for skill and injury. All players get guarantees for skill, some get for injury, but never that buttoned up because the league, going back to Art Rooney days, wanted you to fund future years of a contract if you guaranteed it for skill and injury. Well, nobody wanted to send a check like the Browns will have to do for $138 million to the league office and let them put it in an escrow account. That just doesn't make sense. But the Browns did it anyway.
Mike Lombardi, GM Shuffle Podcast, former Browns GM and VP and personnel guru for years around the league, with us here on the Fan Morning Show. So let me ask you this. I want to go back to the question of picking up a quarterback this offseason, but then still needing a quarterback, right? You talked about Carson Wentz and a couple other guys. Does Baker Mayfield now fall into that category that wherever he ends up, that team is still going to need a quarterback in the future?
I think so, and I think even more so, I think the bigger issue with Baker is the contract. I think Baker would probably be on another team by now, but nobody wants to pay him that money, and he doesn't have a contract for next season. That's really the issue. He doesn't have a contract next year, and he thinks he's going to make in that 40 to 45 million range, or even 35. He's not worth it. Baker Mayfield really is a play-action pass quarterback. He needs to be under center. Right? He needs to be under center. He can't see down the field. That's why Beckham can't get the ball. That's why they don't throw the ball well to the outside. That's why their passing game was always in the middle of the field, because he can't see it. And so what they tried to do, why they moved on from him, was because they needed somebody to extend the field horizontally and vertically. And Mayfield, because of his size limitations, he can't do that. People push the pocket back into his face. They make him have to throw the ball over the wall, and he can't do it. And he makes mistakes and the ball sails. He gets more balls tipped at the line or by defensive backs than anybody. He averages over 6 a game. That means the defense is touching the ball 6 times. There's 6 interceptions potential. That's not very good. So I think because of the contract, he doesn't have a team. Is he better than a couple guys that are starters? Absolutely. I think he's better than Drew Lock, but nobody wants to take on the $18 million.
Michael Lombardi, Odyssey, NFL Insider Michael Lombardi. Insider Calls brought to you by Driveway.com. Michael, thank you. That was great stuff. We appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Head to Driveway.com today. Shop for more than 25,000 new and used cars in Driveway's nationwide inventory. Not a Mitch Trubisky fan. That is for sure. Man, was that strong stuff. He is so good. So good. I like
also
it.
not a fan of the quarterback class either.
No. Or the grassy knoll.
I like that. I wish we would have had more time.
Yes.
We could have explored Mike's JFK conspiracy theories.
So